Good afternoon. My name is Honor Feedy, and I am a staff person here at NAESP. I'd like to welcome you all to this afternoon's webinar session on Essentials for Principals, the School Leader's Guide to Professional Learning Communities at Work. This afternoon we are very proud to have Dr. Rick and Becky DeFore with us. They're going to share their knowledge and expertise. I'm sure all of you have heard of them before if you've not been in one of their sessions. The way we were able to get this wonderful presentation is through a partnership that we have with Solution Tree. They've been a wonderful partner to us, and we're real happy to have the DeFores with us this afternoon. For those of you that have just joined us, I'd like to make you aware of some of the way we're going to be handling today's webinar. For those of you that have access to the website, you can download a copy of today's PowerPoint and follow it along. Please go to our website at www.naesp.org/webinars, and you'll see a download link. You can then print it out and follow along. Also, today's webinar is being recorded and should be available. We'll be posting it both to our website as well as sending it to Solution Tree so they can post it on their website. Let me give you some background on our speakers today. Rebecca DeFore has served as a teacher, school administrator, and central office coordinator. As a former elementary school principal, yay, Becky has helped her school earn state and national recognition as a model professional learning community. She is one of the featured principals in the Video Journal of Education program entitled Elementary Principals as Leaders of Learning. Becky has also co-authored many books and video series on the topics of PLCs. Rick DeFore was a public school educator for 34 years, serving as a teacher, principal, and superintendent. He served as the principal of the Adlai E. Stevenson High School in Lincolnshire, Illinois, from 1983 to 1991, and as superintendent of the district from 91 to 2002. During his tenure, Stevenson became what the United States Department of Education has described as the most recognized and celebrated school in America. And with that, I will turn it over to our speakers.
Well, thank you, Honor, and thank you for those of you who are joining us today. It's our pleasure to talk about the leader's role in professional learning communities at work. And we think it would be appropriate to begin with just a clarification on what do we mean by those terms. So why don't we start with the term leader. What is it that we mean when we talk about leadership? We would argue that it includes certain things. It begins by working with others to establish a shared sense of purpose, priorities, and direction. Now, that means that working with others is, I think, an important phrase there because it suggests that you can't do this alone. It's not something you can do on your own. And part of your responsibility is to engage others in this process. Once you have that sense of direction and purpose and people understand the school they're trying to create, then the next step in leadership is to clarify the very specific steps that people must begin to take in order to move the school in the right direction. And very importantly, we think, one of the chief responsibilities of leaders is creating the conditions that allow other people to succeed at what they're being asked to do. So I'm going to have Becky attack the first issue. How do you go about establishing clear purpose, priorities, and direction?
So as the leader of the organization begins to work with a leadership team, we would advise every principal, every superintendent, every leader of an organization to surround himself or herself with a guiding coalition, a group of champions who are going to be willing to help advance the school's purpose and priorities. As you are working with the leadership team and then with your full faculties, you want to take the very first important step of making decisions, and that is building shared knowledge. All we mean by that is learning together. So you gather the members of your organization and you share the knowledge base with the organization that will help the people in your school or school district make informed decisions. As you probably heard, asking uninformed people to make decisions will only result in uninformed decisions. So you start the process of making decisions by learning together. You share the knowledge base with your staff about what do we know about improving schools, what do we know today about highly effective schools. And you're probably aware there is numerous research to support some of the processes and concepts we're going to be talking about today. But as Honor mentioned, there's a partnership with Solution Tree and NAESP, and we have available at your fingertips the research to support improving schools. What do we know about best practice? So that's part of the knowledge base that you're going to be sharing with your faculty. And in addition to that, you also build shared knowledge about the school's current reality. In other words, you're painting a data picture of your school. What do we know about our trends in student achievement, student discipline, student engagement, faculty perception, community perception of our school, the changing different demographics that may pose concerns or issues that we've never had to face before. So we build shared knowledge on our current reality and on what we know today to be best practice in the world of improving schools. The second step we take, for example, if we're trying to build a learning community in our organization, we have to ensure that we're implementing the big ideas that are going to drive these high-performing schools and school districts. And if you're familiar at all with the research on professional learning communities, the big ideas are these. We embrace learning as our fundamental purpose. And because learning for all is our purpose, for the students and the adults who serve those students, we're willing as a staff to over time examine all of our practices, policies, procedures through the lens of how is what we're doing impacting learning for our students. And as we find disconnect between our priorities and what the current reality is, we're willing to examine and begin to make changes to traditional practice to better align with learning for all. The second big idea is we're going to build a collaborative culture. Again, there's no way that a single leader or even a few people can change an entire organization, so we have to work together. The fundamental building block of a professional learning community is the collaborative team. So we break down the walls of isolation in our traditional settings. We organize people into high-performing collaborative teams, and the teams are the engines that drive the improvement processes that we put in place in our school. The third big idea, we embrace results. We become hungry for evidence that lets us know whether or not our practices truly are making that positive difference for the students that we serve. So embracing learning, building a collaborative culture, focus on results. A third step that leaders take as they are establishing the clear purpose and priorities of their organization is they recognize that we're building consensus and we're not waiting for unanimity. In other words, no one person on our staff will have veto power as to whether or not our school moves forward. So we use a consensus building process that allows all voices to be heard, and then we make a decision based on that process. What do we mean by consensus in the professional learning community? We're going to, again, provide the knowledge base. We give people time to study that knowledge base, to ask questions about it, to state pros and cons that relate to the proposal that we're trying to bring about. So we're hearing all points of view. We solicit dissent. We want to hear from people who are not enthusiastic about the proposed changes. We want to hear and to see the research that might be in opposition from what we're trying to embrace in our school and school culture. So we solicit dissent, and then ultimately we ask the group that has been involved in the process to make a decision. And we recognize that it probably won't be 100% of everyone being enthusiastic about it, but the people who are not voting yay for the proposal will recognize that the will of the group is evident and that therefore the school will move forward with the proposal for improvement.
So for example, as a principal of a large school, I tried to arrange the faculty into small group dialogues. It's difficult to build consensus 100 people at a time. So we arranged for dialogues, not monologues, for conversation, not presentation, where we did build shared knowledge about the current status of our school and about best practices. notice that the term that we use to describe the school is professional learning community. So we always begin a decision-making process by learning together. But at some time we have to get beyond learning and we have to make decisions about how we're going to act. And so we would present a proposal in our small group dialogues. For example, we are going to organize the staff into collaborative teams by course or by grade level. So we're going to have all the third grade teachers working together as a collaborative team in answering the critical questions that arise in the learning community. What is it we want our kids to learn? How do we know if our kids are learning? How will we respond when our kids struggle with their learning, when we have evidence that some of them haven't learned, and how can we enrich and extend the learning for the kids who did get it? So let's assume we present that as a proposal. No longer will you be working in isolation, teaching your own curriculum, giving your own assessments, figuring out your own systems of intervention, but we're going to do this now collectively and collaboratively as a team. We would then ask that group to think of all the reasons to oppose that proposal. Let's make a comprehensive list of cons. And then when they couldn't think of another possible con, we'd ask them to list all of the pros. What are all of the advantages of implementing this new structure, of moving away from isolation and toward collaboration? And after all the advantages, all the pros and cons have been listed, we've already met half of our definition of consensus. We've identified and made sure that all points of view were being heard. But we've done it in a non-acrimonious way. No one is arguing, no one's debating, no one's staked out a position yet. We're simply engaging people in an intellectual exercise to tell us what are the advantages and disadvantages of moving forward with the proposal. And then we ask them to indicate their level of approval for the proposal simply using fist to 5. 5 means I love this idea, I'll champion it, I'll be a team leader. 4 means I strongly agree it's what we should do. 3 is whatever, if that's what the rest of the people want to do, I'll do it. 2 is I have reservations, I don't know that we should do this yet. 1 is I think this is a bad idea, I'm opposed. And fist means I would really like to veto this, I don't want to do this. Now you don't have veto power, but it is a way to give a person a chance to indicate their level of opposition to the proposal. When we asked people, okay, we've heard the pros, we've heard the cons, we've studied it together, the research for and against. Now let's see what's your position. Do we want to embrace this, yes or no? 1, 2, 3, vote. It was always evident what the will of the group was. It was overwhelmingly supportive of moving forward. That doesn't mean, though, that there was unanimity. There was sometimes people who didn't think it was a good idea, would prefer not to do it. But as long as they acknowledged that the will of the group was to move forward, they also had to acknowledge that they weren't self-employed, and if they were going to be a part of the school, they were going to move forward with us. Now that's how we did it in small group dialogues, but Becky took it even a step further. In her school, she met with all of her teachers in their grade level teams the summer before she took over as principal. She began in July and the school year hadn't started yet. But she made arrangements for all the teams to come in, and she asked them a series of questions. Tell me about what makes this such a great school, and tell me about what would make it an even better school. What are the things that are the obstacles, the things that are getting in the way of you accomplishing what you would like to accomplish? She heard some very consistent feedback, and as you can imagine, the most consistent feedback was we don't have enough time, we don't have time to talk, we don't have time to help the students who are struggling. We have a revolving door in our classroom because specialists are pulling students out of the classroom right and left. We don't have large blocks of time for instruction. Sometimes a large number of students will be out of the class at once. So based on, she just listened. She didn't say, listen to me, I have all the answers. She said, I want to hear what your concerns and questions are. And so when the school year started, she began the year by saying, I have listened to you. I have heard your questions. I have heard your concerns. And I agree, those are legitimate concerns. And so working with some representative teachers, we've created a schedule that's going to address every one of those concerns. We guarantee you'll have large blocks of uninterrupted time for instruction. We guarantee you will have time to collaborate with others. We guarantee there will be time for you to intervene and enrich for your students. So it put her in a very different position. Instead of being the principal who says, I know everything, listen to me, I've been here a whole month, and so obviously I've got all the answers. She said, I have listened to you, and you've come up with some great ideas, and now I'm trying to promote and protect the school that you say you want to become. So that was, I think, a very important step in her principalship. It put her in a position to be the promoter and protector of faculty vision and values. Another issue is ultimately you want to create a solid foundation for the professional learning community. I want you to think of your school as resting on 4 pillars, or think of it as a chair with 4 legs. If all 4 of them are there, you're in good shape, you've got a solid foundation, and the rest of your work will be built on a solid foundation. But if you don't have all 4 there, if you've skipped 1 or 2 or 3, then you're going to be building your school on very shaky ground. So what are those pillars? Each one asks a question of people in the school. The first question is, why do we exist? Now that's the mission pillar. And I'm sure many of you have written mission statements for your school, and that's just an attempt to clarify what is the fundamental purpose of our school. Let's keep the main thing the main thing. Let's sharpen our priorities here. Then we move on to the next question. What must we become as a school in order to fulfill that vision? Now we know a lot of people use mission and vision interchangeably, but they're really not interchangeable. They're 2 very different terms that are asking organizations to address 2 different issues. Well, mission is on an enduring fundamental purpose. Vision is what's the compelling future we're hoping to create in order to fulfill that purpose. It gives direction to the school and to people within the school. The third pillar, and the one that most frequently gets ignored, is the commitments that we must make collectively in order to move the school in that direction. Organizational theorists would call that values. It's the values pillar. And here we're talking about how. How must we behave collectively in order to move the school in the direction we want to take it? We want to give a sense of how can I, as an individual, contribute to this. So these are attempts to guide the behavior of people in the organization. And lastly, we have the goals pillar, which simply lays out targets and timelines. We don't want to say we have a 5-year plan to improve the school, and 5 years from now we'll check to see if we're making progress. We need to see incremental progress all along the way. So we identify what are those factors of progress, and how will we be gathering evidence of whether or not we're actually making the progress. Now, once that foundation is in place, then you as a principal have a good footing upon which to go forward. But you still will face a dilemma. And here's the dilemma I think that all principals face when it comes to trying to move their school in the right direction. Do I need to be assertive and directive and tell people this is what we're doing? Or do I need to encourage autonomy and empowerment and hope for improvement from the bottom up? Which should I be? Should I be firm and assertive, or empowering and facilitating and just sort of stay out of people's way? And you make a mistake if you answer either of those in the affirmative. You don't want to have this as a question of or, should I be this or that? It's really a question of and. You do need to be assertive and directive, and you also need to be empowering and facilitating. We refer to this as a simultaneously loose and tight culture. A culture where some things are non-discretionary. It's tight, and you as the principal make sure that people understand that it's tight. But within those few tight parameters that you establish, you encourage people to be creative and autonomous and innovative. So what's tight? What would be tight in a professional learning community? Well, there are going to be certain things that we think that the research has made clear you have the right to insist will occur in your school. And the first is that the fundamental structure of the school will be the collaborative team. No one will be working in isolation anymore, and we're going to take collective responsibility for student learning. One of the most important things we're going to ask the team to do is to answer the very critical question of any school that says they want to help all kids learn, and that is learn what? We're going to create a guaranteed and viable curriculum unit by unit. So we want to be able to assure every student, every parent, that it doesn't matter which fourth grade teacher you get in language arts, because the teachers themselves have committed and have guaranteed these are the skills they will teach, and they will teach these skills not just sometime between September and June, but rather they will teach those skills unit by unit. In the next 3 weeks, all students will be learning this very important skill. Now again, how a teacher teaches the skill and pacing from day to day can vary depending on the teacher. They have autonomy, they can make decisions, they can go back and reteach something if they didn't think the kids got it, but over the course of the 3 weeks, there is a tightness. This is the content we're going to be teaching. Once the team has agreed on these are the essential skills, concepts, and dispositions we want our students to acquire, then the team has to ask the question, well, how will we know if our students are learning? And so they will, as a team, begin to develop an assessment process that will include frequent team-developed common formative assessments. Of course, each teacher, each day, is going to be gathering evidence of student learning through all those good formative assessment tools that we know that you use. When you're randomly directing questions, when you're having students signal you, when you're saying, write this answer down, I'm going to come and check your answer, when you're using whiteboards and signals, thumbs up, thumbs down, exit slips, those are all great ways you as an individual can gather evidence of student learning. But sometimes, by the end of the unit, the team needs to stop and say, let's look as a team at the evidence of student learning, and then that's when you're going to create common formative assessments. Now, all of this suggests that there is going to be a need for a common vocabulary in your school. People need to know what you mean when you say a guaranteed curriculum. They need to know what you mean when you say a formative assessment or a common assessment or a system of interventions. So part of your responsibility in building shared knowledge is building a common vocabulary. Keep in mind that as you're doing this work, you're not just giving people a series of tasks to get done. What you're really doing is trying to create a common mindset so that everybody in your school is operating with a shared understanding of purpose, of direction, of commitments, of goals, and of the fundamental work they must do in order to help their kids learn.
When teams of teachers administer common assessments, they've agreed on exactly the essential skills or concepts or the dispositions that they're instructing during that particular cycle of instruction, and then they agree on the instrument they'll use to gather evidence as a team as to whether or not students are learning the intended curriculum. They then have to use those results gathered from the common formative assessments in very specific ways. So again, how we use results, that third big idea of a PLC, is very tight within the culture of a professional learning community at work. When educators give the common assessments and gather the results as a collaborative team, each individual member on the team looks at his or her results in comparison to the entire team. They look for areas of strength in their instruction where they can share strategies and processes and pedagogy with their colleagues, but they also look for areas of the assessment where their students may not have performed as well as some of their colleagues. And so they use that as an opportunity to learn from their colleagues, to improve their own individual practice by sharing best practice across that collaborative team. If an entire team gives a common assessment on an essential skill or concept that they had all spent time teaching, and then the team recognizes that the students really didn't perform at the level the team was hoping for, that then would signal to the team this is a need for all of us to learn to do things a little bit differently. Our own team professional development will be driven by the results of this common assessment. We might need to seek help from someone outside of our team to show us best practice. Maybe there's someone in our school or school district that has some strategies that differ from those that we use that could enhance our instruction and therefore help more kids learn. So we use the results to identify team professional development goals and activities as well. And very importantly, we use those same results to identify the individual needs of the students that we're collectively serving. In other words, by name and by need, we look to see who are the students that learn this essential skill at a high level. Are there students that we think they've learned it, but they really need a little more time, more support, more maintenance, more practice? And are there some students, based on these results, that are clearly struggling to learn what we deem to be essential to their success? And now what will we do as a collaborative team to give our students more time and more support to learn the intended outcomes? This is where the work of the collaborative team has to expand beyond its own members and lean into the capacity of the school to provide the team and the students with extra support through the lens of intervention and enrichment. And we're going to talk a little bit later in this webinar in more detail about what that system may look like. At this point, for the leaders involved in this session, principals, teacher leaders, other leaders of the organization, there's a very important concept we want to make sure that is crystal clear in your minds, and it's this. For every action, for every step you ask a teacher or a collaborative team to take in your organization, you as the leader have a responsibility to give those members of your organization everything they need in order to be successful. Richard Elmore calls this concept reciprocal accountability. Every time I ask you to be accountable for something, I need to be accountable to you to give you everything you need in order to be successful. So what are some things that teams and entire school faculties need in order to be successful in establishing professional learning communities? Well, first and foremost, they need to be members of meaningful teams. So it's one of your roles is to structure your school into meaningful teams. And we know from the research that the most meaningful structures for teams in schools are those in which teachers share typically content and they also share students. So we're talking grade level teams, job-alike teams at the middle school level, even interdisciplinary teams with an overarching curricular or academic goal. So first step, meaningful teams. And in the School Leader's Guide, we have lots of different strategies for structuring teams that are linked by research to gains in student achievement. Once teams have been structured in a way that makes sense, a second obligation you have to those teams as the leader is to ensure that time to collaborate is built into their regular contractual day and work week. In other words, we're not asking people to give up personal time in order to collaborate. It is such a priority in a learning community that we build that collaborative time right into the work schedule. It just becomes a natural part of our work routine. And again, in the book, both elementary and middle school examples of ways to provide time that don't require us to shut down our schools and keep the students at home so teachers can collaborate, time that doesn't require us to spend more money in order to have teachers collaborating, or even lose instructional time to make this happen. Very creative ways for making time are included in the book. Once we have the team structure and the time provided, we want to help teams get off to a good start by helping them clarify the collective commitments they make to one another regarding how are we going to work together as members of this collaborative team and what shared goals will our team be pursuing. In addition to that, we want to make sure that throughout the process that the leader is supporting each and every team by clarifying the right work to be done and then monitoring, supporting, and celebrating that right work as teams accomplish what we've asked them to do.
One thing that's become very clear in the research on professional learning communities is that simply providing people with time to collaborate will not improve student achievement unless they co-labor on the right work. And so how can you as a principal make sure that a team is in fact focusing on the right work? Well, one thing that you can do is to monitor that they're using their time productively. And the best strategy for doing that is not to sit in on every team meeting, but rather to establish clarity regarding the products that the team should generate as part of the natural dialogue of a team that's focused on the right work. So if I say, for example, to a team, are you clear on your essential outcomes for the first unit that you're going to teach? I'm not looking for yes as the answer. I'm looking for a listing of the essential outcomes. If I say, are you clear on your team SMART goal, I'm not looking for yes. I'm looking for the team SMART goal. So like Becky did in her elementary school, she had a folder or a binder for each team, and she had created a timeline by a certain date. I expect every team to create this. Anytime a team was unable to meet that timeline, she knew that, well, here's a team that's having some difficulty, and then she would work with the team leader or intervene with the entire team to get those difficulties resolved. So she was, again, fulfilling her responsibilities in terms of servant leadership, reciprocal accountability. Another very important thing that principals need to do in order to improve the school and create conditions for success is to provide feedback loops through common formative assessments. How can a teacher discover what his or her strengths and weaknesses are unless they have information that's informing them of those strengths and weaknesses? Now, typically or traditionally, we've tried to do this through supervision and evaluation, and there's a big push on that across the country right now. We think it's misplaced. We think, for example, when Becky was the principal of her elementary school, she could view that school as 25 individual kingdoms, and she was going to go in and evaluate each teacher and try and give that teacher meaningful feedback. But instead of doing it that way, she thought of her school as 6 very tightly knit teams and created a process which, through common assessments, each teacher was able to see, here's a strength of mine that I can share with others, or here's a weakness of mine. Our assumption is that most people would like to do better, that they're probably doing the very best that they can, and until they have evidence that there's a better way and help in implementing that new way, they're not going to be able to improve. So the collaborative team process, and particularly this clarity on student learning and common assessments and sharing, the transparency of information where teachers can learn their strengths and weaknesses, gives people the information they need in order to improve. And we think that's an absolutely essential step in this PLC process. Make sure, in fact, we would argue that it's sort of the crux of the work, making sure that every teacher is getting the information they need in order to improve. The next step is providing protocols for using evidence of student learning in ways that will benefit individual teachers, the entire team, and students. Just having teachers sit and look at a data sheet is not going to improve instruction if they don't know what to do with the information that's in front of them. So we've provided a data analysis protocol sheet that we can make available to you. It's relatively simple. It asks a team at the end of every common assessment to list who are the students who were unable to demonstrate proficiency on the skills that we said were essential. And then it asks them to list who are the students who are so highly proficient already that if we spend a lot of time going back and reviewing for the kids who didn't get it, those highly proficient kids are going to be bored. How can we enrich and extend their learning? We ask the question, what's an strength or weakness of me as an individual teacher? What's something I can share with my colleagues that seems to be working, or where's an area where I need to help my colleagues? And finally, we ask, and where's an area where our team isn't getting the results we want, and what do we need to do in order to improve? The key to that last point is, what do we need to do in order to improve? It's easy to say, well, the kids need to study more, or wish we had better kids, or parents need to be more involved. But the focus of a collaborative team and a PLC is always going to be within their own sphere of influence. The way we're doing it isn't leading to kids learning. What are some changes that we might make in order to make sure that happens? And then finally, no matter how well a team does, typically at the end of the unit, there will still be some kids who didn't get it. And so as a school, we have to ask the question, if we say we want all kids to learn, and if at the end of a unit we have evidence that many of our students or some of our students didn't learn, What will we as a school do about that? How will we give those students additional time and additional support for learning that content in a way that never removes them from new direct instruction? Becky can give you some examples.
In the book, The School Leader's Guide to Professional Learning Communities at Work, the same title of our webinar today, we've tried to provide you with both elementary and middle school examples of the systematic intervention process. Also, there's a website that we want to alert all of you to. It's called All Things PLC. If you just Google All Things PLC, it will take you to this no-commerce website that has hundreds of schools now that are on the website as model professional learning communities, and each of those schools has explained in a narrative how they've built a system of interventions in their school to guarantee every student extra time and extra support. Also on the All Things PLC website, there are lots of sample schedules and other resources, including the data protocol that Rick was just mentioning. But in the book, The School Leader's Guide, we make it clear that when it comes to the question, how will we respond to the students who did not learn, simultaneously to those students who did learn, that those two questions go beyond the scope of what a collaborative team can accomplish by itself. It needs the entire capacity of the school to come to bear on those two questions. So the principal, the leaders of these schools, structure support teams that, if you will, push into or flood a grade level at a designated time of the day, providing the students and the collaborative team with extra support, the human resources that we can gather together to go in to support the student learning. If you think about traditional practice, in most schools, traditionally, when a student struggled to learn, very often it was up to the individual teacher to decide, how will I respond? And if we're honest, the responses from teacher to teacher have varied greatly. Some teachers try to work with students in small group or one-on-one while they give other students some busy work or quiet work to do. Other teachers are able and willing to come early or stay late, and parents bring their students before or after school to get that extra support. Sometimes we have pull-out programs that give students extra time and support, but very often, because of scheduling issues, a student is pulled out of new direct instruction to get extra support, and the result is that student falls further and further behind. So in a learning community, we're very strategic and systematic about the plan for intervention. In the School Leader's Guide, and again on the All Things PLC website, there are multiple schedules, but the one that you're seeing on the screen now is a relatively generic PLC schedule for an elementary school, where you'll see that at every given grade level, regardless of how many sections of that grade level, it could be 2 kindergarten classrooms or 12, all of the kindergarten teachers have come together and they've built their grade level schedule. They've said, this is when the kindergarten teachers teach science during the day, or language arts, or math, or this is when we have recess, or go to lunch, or when we have art and music and PE. So they've built a team-wide schedule. Very importantly, you'll see in the schedule from grade to grade, there's a designated time for small group instruction, intervention, and enrichment across the entire grade level. Every teacher at the grade level, plus the support people that the school can provide, people like, for example, teacher assistants, special education teachers, reading recovery or literacy specialist or math specialist, might be ELL or ELD. So the ancillary people in the schedule that are non-homeroom based, that traditionally have pulled students out for extra support, become now part of a support team that pushes into the grade level during the designated time, providing extra helping hands, providing extra expertise to meet the needs of small groups of students identified by the results of the common assessment, those students that need extra time and extra support to meet or exceed proficiency standards, And at the same time, we're enriching and extending for the students whose evidence of the common assessments lets us know that they've learned the intended, and now they're ready to apply those intended skills at a deeper, richer level. So we build schedules, and then we create support teams that push into the grade levels. So that's a master schedule that you'll see included in the School Leaders Guide. And then we try to break down that master schedule into some grade level examples that again show you at any given point in the day what are the students engaged in that relates to their learning and to their well-being as students. So we create structures that support the culture that we're trying to accomplish here through how we allocate time, how we allocate the people that are staffing our buildings, and the resources that we have to run our instructional programs. At this point, we recognize you've listened a great deal, about 40+ minutes of listening on your part. And what we'd like to do at this point is to invite questions, Honor, that you've been collecting as we've engaged in the webinar.
Thank you very much. That was so informative. One question that has come up is, what do you do about cases of discipline, where maybe students are acting out? How is that handled in the PLC environment?
When we talk about the essential learnings for our students, the skills, the concepts, and the dispositions, included in that term dispositions would be what are the behaviors, the character traits, the work ethic that we want our students to acquire and exemplify as they move through our program this year and next year as they are part of our school. So certainly collaborative teams of teachers identify the desired behaviors that we want our students to engage in the classroom. They create incentives for students to want to behave well, and then consequences that are applied rather consistently across the team and across the school. So you'll see a lot of schools in the professional learning community process embracing a behavior component in their pyramid of interventions. This is what we expect. We model that. We teach those behaviors to our students in our collaborative teams, in our classrooms. We praise and celebrate the good behaviors, and then we teach the students through leveled consequences, to make better choices, to make better decisions. So when this is done well, Honor, you'll see discipline infractions and referrals diminish greatly over time, and you'll see students being more highly engaged, more likely to want to behave well in the classrooms because the learning and the incentives are, are benefiting the students.
Wonderful, thank you. Another question, how do you find your teacher leaders? Do they apply? How do they fit in?
There are a number of different ways that you can approach that, and Becky and I did it a little different in our schools. In our case, in the school where I was the principal, they did apply. We felt it was a very important job, and we didn't want to give the impression that just anybody who had a passing interest could do it. And so you applied, we interviewed you, we asked questions, and we also provided a benefit. If you were selected as a team leader, although you didn't get additional compensation, you were released 1 period a day to address your leadership responsibilities with your team. It was an appointment, but it wasn't a Supreme Court appointment. It didn't last a lifetime. If we found that you weren't being an effective leader, we could remove you from the leadership position. But typically that didn't happen, to be honest. People who were selected as leaders took pride in it. They worked hard at it. And we also provided training for those leaders throughout the year in terms of trying to give them the skills they needed in order to be successful. So before a team leader was going to go in, for example, and ask a team to write a SMART goal, we made sure to train all the leaders so that they were very clear on, well, what is a SMART goal, what's a process for writing a SMART goal, what are examples of SMART goals, how will we know if we've written a good SMART goal. So we tried to make sure that they had the tools that were necessary for them to be successful. In Becky's case, as a brand new principal to the school, she couldn't really appoint someone. So she asked the team to select their team leader, but she established certain parameters. It had to be somebody who wasn't new to the team and wasn't new to the school, and they had to be willing to accept the position for at least.
We said no less than 2 years and no more than 3. Our intent was that we would rotate team leaders over time. And as the school has continued on the journey for a number of years now, in spite of leadership changes, they have had that rotation of team leaders over time. At the elementary level, we couldn't guarantee our team leaders a period a day to work on the team leadership responsibilities, but we did remove any other leadership role or other commitment from those people's plate. For example, we stopped having committees that were not aligned with the purpose and priorities of our schools, so we eliminated some of the old structures that used to take inordinate amounts of time from teachers. If you were a team leader, we did not ask you to serve on the school improvement committee or on the student support team or the child study committee, so it was your primary leadership role and responsibility. So we attempted to disperse leadership across the school, but the team leaders were constantly working with the principal and their colleagues to do the right work that was leading to higher levels of student learning. We've also worked with other schools that have said that they use kind of the cooperative learning process in appointing leaders, and every member of the team has a designated role or responsibility. One person is the leader, someone else is the recorder, we've got a timekeeper. So everyone has a designated role, and they rotate those roles over time. A caution from those schools, a learning that they've shared with us, is you certainly don't want to rotate that leadership role too often, because it takes time to become adept at the leadership responsibilities, and we want to give people the success.
Wonderful, thank you. Next question, how does the PLC handle attendance and truancy?
Well, we're in favor of attendance and opposed to truancy. We've come out very strong.
Sorry, the sarcasm is dripping.
We try to address it primarily as rather than thinking of what are the best ways to punish students who don't come to school, to try to think of it in terms of what can we do to create such an inviting school that kids really want to be here. For example, in my prior school, before I arrived, there were 1,600 students, and they had had 1,200 out-of-school suspensions in the previous year, and the #1 cause of suspension was truancy. So they were penalizing students who had chosen to cut school by telling them they couldn't come to school, which really makes no sense whatsoever. So instead, we tried to think in terms of what could we do to make the school more inviting, and we created advisory programs, upperclassmen mentors. We required every student to join an activity, a co-curricular activity, like a sports team or a fine arts program or a service organization. They had to belong to something. So every student who came into the school had an advisor, an upperclassman mentor, or part of a program. But most importantly, they were all in classes where teachers were passionately committed to helping them be successful. And what we discovered was that when students were successful in school and when they were connected to their school through their interpersonal connections with other kids in clubs and organizations, through their connections with their mentors, through their principal or teacher connections, advisor connections, they come to school. I think we have to ask the question, why would a student choose not to come to school? And typically it's because it's not a place where I'm successful and it's not a place that I feel connected to. So we were very focused on trying to make sure every student was successful. We checked their progress every 3 weeks. Every parent and every student got a progress report or a report card, and now of course it's available online on a daily basis. A student and parent can check to see how a student's doing. So we're doing everything possible to help kids be successful and to feel connected. And if we succeed in that, chances are they're going to come to school. Now there will be those, school phobic kids or kids whose parents don't fulfill their responsibility to get them up in the morning and so forth. And so typically what we have to do in those instances is look for support from organizations outside of the school, because that's a family problem, or an emotional problem, not just an academic problem. But in general, if you say, we're going to make this such a good place to be, where everybody's being successful, where everyone feels connected, where everyone knows that somebody cares about them, attendance and discipline and truancy, they kind of take care of themselves.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And one of the documents, Honor, that is posted on All Things PLC is called a data picture of our school. It's an electronic document that any principal or school can access and begin to paint your picture. And what we've experienced over time with all of the schools that have been successful with the PLC process is they begin to see a dramatic rise in attendance rates if that was a traditional problem or issue. And as Rick was saying, we make that school really inviting. At the elementary level, most often it's not the student, but rather something's happening at home if the student is not coming to school on a regular basis. So we make those phone calls, we reach out, we make personal visits, we tap into the community organizations, social services, social workers that will help us help that family so that we can have the child in the building.
Thank you. That's great. How do parents perceive the PLC model?
When we first started our process at my former school, it was a relatively traditional school. I mean, obviously, like all schools, staffed with great people, but the structures hadn't been in place for teachers to work in collaborative teams prior to our first year together. We began to host parent workshops as a grade level team. So every team hosted a parent workshop within the first 3 weeks of school in the first 3 weeks of our second semester, first year. Our intent of those workshops was to help the parents understand the role of the collaborative team, how their child would not only be served by their homeroom teacher, but by all the members of that team, and that we would take collective responsibility for success, that we would create systems of extra support during the school day that wouldn't require parents to bring their students before school or pick them up late after school in order to get extra support. I can honestly tell you our parents were tremendously excited and supported. They understood over time the benefits of the process. Most parents would embrace the thought that a lot of people in this building care about my student, will work with my student, whether it's through enrichment or intervention or just a little extra practice. Parents really embrace the process. But schools do need to be attentive to educating the parent community about the processes that their student will be engaged in.
One of the things that we've asked people to think about is think of the day you took your own child to school for the very first time. And if you were taking your child to a traditional school, if we're brutally honest, and we ask the question, well, what happens if my student struggles? Traditionally, a principal would have had to have said, well, it really depends on which teacher he gets, because some teachers will let kids make up their work and some won't, and some teachers will accept late work and some won't, and some teachers are a little better at teaching initial concepts than others, and hopefully your student will get their share of good teachers. We try to hire really good people, but if we're honest, we have to acknowledge that in different grade levels we might have a person or two that's really strong. And so what the principal ends up doing then is fending off all the parents who come in, all of them wanting to have their student in the classroom with the teacher who's perceived to be the strongest. But basically, in that system, what happens to a student in terms of their success or failure is going to depend during that school year almost exclusively on the individual teacher to whom they've been assigned. But if they're in a professional learning community and they went in and they said to the principal, what happens if my child struggles in your school? The principal could say, well, we're going to assign your child to a team of teachers every year for the next 6 years in this elementary school, and the entire team at each grade level is going to be collectively responsible for your student's success. And as soon as your student begins to experience any difficulty, the team has a process in place to identify that immediately, and the person on the team who gets the best results in teaching that particular skill is going to work with your child in small group instruction until they get that skill. Your student is going to have access to every member of this faculty over the course of their 6 years here. They're going to have access to the very best teacher, skill by skill, in whatever they're struggling with. And when we present that to people and say, well, which school would you want to send your kid to? The sort of traditional, I hope I get a good teacher this year school, or the school that says, we're going to guarantee your kid's going to have access to the very best teacher in that grade level every year for 6 years. There's no question what most people prefer. It's pretty much unanimous. And so then the challenge for us is, if that's what we want for our children, why aren't we creating schools like that for every child? And I think if we approach the PLC process from the standpoint of what would I want for my child, wouldn't I want my child to go to a school where everyone was committed to helping all kids learn, where people were working collaboratively and taking collective responsibility for their learning, where they were very clear on exactly what they wanted students to learn, unit by unit, and constantly gathering evidence of whether or not the student was being successful, and then intervening when they weren't, enriching when they were. I mean, who wouldn't want to send your child to a school like that? So if that's what we want for our kids, then we have an ethical and professional obligation to provide it for all kids.
That's great. What advice would you give to principals in terms of getting resources and backing and support from district office in terms of resources, in terms of staffing these teams, especially for rural areas?
I think that most of the things that we're talking about are dependent on the human resources and the human resources within the building. And so if we approach this from the standpoint of the only way I could ever have my school operate as a professional learning community is if we have an infusion of new dollars and new people, it's going to be dead on arrival. There aren't new dollars and there aren't new people out there in abundance that we're going to be able to have access to in this economy. So I think we have to start by focusing in on what are the resources that we have available to us now and how can we use them differently. There are schools on the All Things PLC list that are national models of the PLC process, that are small rural schools that have virtually no resources to speak of. We've seen schools, for example, in Sanger, California, which is has the lowest per capita income of any one of the 435 congressional districts in the United States, become an international model of a successful PLC process at the same time that California was cutting their funding year after year after year. So I hope that the people who are listening aren't going to think of this in terms of, well, how do I go get extra resources? I think you simply need to focus on what you have and using what you have differently. And I don't know of any districts that have opposed schools saying we want to work collaboratively, we want to help all kids learn, we want to intervene when kids struggle. I think it would be a very rare district office that would say, well, we're not in favor of those things. So our advice to that principal is focus on what's within your sphere of influence. You can do an awful lot of things in that building that can help your school become a PLC, and you don't have to rely on others to do it.
And simultaneous to that, because of the success of the school, you will be influencing up. Your district will have to at some point sit up and take notice of the changes and the benefits that are happening in the building. And so we've seen entire districts embrace the PLC process because a single school within the district had the courage to begin to do things differently and to the great benefit of the students that they were serving. There are district models on the All Things PLC website, And many of those small rural schools and districts are using electronic collaboration to partner together with one another. So that's another strategy to expand the resources, just simply using the technology and tap into other schools or districts that are engaging in the process.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Any suggestions for small schools that only have one class per grade? And with that, any suggestions for organizing teams for small schools with one class per grade?
Yeah, great question. And there is a whole section on the All Things PLC website devoted to small schools and then singletons within schools. If I'm an individual teacher, I'm the only one who teaches what I teach. So there's a wealth of information on the website. But two structures that are typical in the small school setting. One is the team is vertical, so it's not a grade level team, but it might be at the elementary level. For example, kindergarten and first grade teachers work together, or K1-2 works together, and 3-4-5. So you have a vertical structure in which the teachers of those separate grade levels build a strong guaranteed curriculum by scope and sequence. What will they learn in kindergarten that spirals into first grade, that spirals into second? How will we assess student learning? The single teacher gives the assessment, but the two critical friends on that collaborative team can offer strategies, resources to that teacher. And very importantly, the vertical team becomes the structure to intervene and enrich. So we think about an enrichment, intervention enrichment block of our day as a vertical block. And again, there are some small schools on the website that could explain their structures, how they overcome that smallness.
The other strategy for the small school with a lot of singletons is to use the technology and network with other folks and create a sister school or partner schools where you may be the only 8th grade science teacher in your school, but you're not the only one in the area, not the only one in the state. And so how could you coordinate your efforts with other 8th grade science teachers? For example, we know of a rural district in Utah where every school is on the same schedule and every department is free at the same time. So they know that all science teachers are going to be free, all 7th and 8th grade science teachers are going to be free during first period.
Every day.
Every day.
It's a planning period.
So that team then says, okay, on Wednesdays, we're going to use Skype, and we're going to use our computers, and we're going to come together as a team during that hour planning period, and we're going to agree on the essential outcomes of the unit we're about to teach. We're going to write a common assessment, agree on pacing. We share our data back and forth with each other. So particularly with the technology that's available today and things like Google Plus and Moogle and Skype and iChat, anyone who argues, but there's no one that I can collaborate with, is really being disingenuous. There certainly are people you can collaborate with. It just is going to take a little coordination in order to help you be successful in collaborating with people outside of your building. And ultimately, even in a large school, we want people to be able to collaborate with people outside of their building too. We need school-to-school partnerships and not just creating incestuous schools where the only ideas are those that occur within these walls.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I think we're at the end of our time. I just have one last question. Any special advice that you two would give to folks as they start implementing the Common Core state standards and maybe utilizing these teams to do that?
Yeah, our advice is that the PLC process is really the only approach that you should even consider when it comes to implementing the Common Core. You can have somebody else write a scope and sequence of the curriculum, whether it's at the state level or the district level, and then give people documents and say, here, go teach this. But that doesn't create clarity. It doesn't create commitment. People are going to interpret the documents differently. They're going to close their door and maybe not even teach them at all. So the only way to implement the Common Core curriculum is to think of it as just an extension of the PLC process. What is it we want kids to learn in the Common Core curriculum? How will we know if they're learning? How will we intervene when they struggle? I mean, these are the constant questions of a PLC, and the fact that teachers all across the United States now are going to be addressing those questions simultaneously with the Common Core gives us the best opportunity for collaboration that we've ever had in this country. And we hope teachers and principals will take advantage of it.
And there are websites that have been created just to support teachers in the PLC process trying to implement the Common Core. One that comes to mind is Mastery Connect, M-A-S-T-E-R-Y, masteryconnect.com. A free website. Again, the Common Core standards are uploaded into the website, and they're creating a national network of teachers who are contributing assessment items and assessment instruments, helping to gather evidence of student learning and to share best practice across.
Well, thank you so much. This has just been a really informative session. I hope you all got a lot out of it. I think your last slide there has your email addresses, right? There we go. So if any of you have other questions as you if you think about this session today, please feel free to email the DeFores, and I'm sure they'll be happy to get back to you. Do you two have any closing remarks that you'd like to give? We would just are so thankful to have you here for this time.
Well, thank you. We first of all, we just want to thank you for attending the webinar. We know how busy an educator's life is, and principals giving up an hour plus of their time to listen and hopefully gather a couple of tips and tools. We thank you for the time. I was a principal in 2 different settings. One in which I tried to manage, keep the status quo going in a very traditional school. I would not call myself a leader at that point. I couldn't, in all good conscience, say I was a leader. The learning community process is a wonderful way to lead a school, and once that learning community is up and running, principals, it makes your jobs easier, because you have people throughout the organization that are helping you advance the mission, the vision, collective commitments and goals. People are empowered to make important decisions within the priorities and parameters that have been established by the school. So we hope that you will either begin or continue on the PLC journey, and we do hope to stay in touch.
Thank you all.